Hello, this is Sondra Oster, Baras, bringing you a few words of Bible from the heart of Biblical Israel. This week's Torah portion is Behar Behukotai. It is the final chapters of the book of Leviticus. And what I'd like to focus on is chapter 26, where we have the contents of a covenant that is entered into between God and the children of Israel. The final verse of that chapter, these are the statutes, the laws, and the teachings which God gave between him and the children of Israel at Mount Sinai in the hands of Moses. The very use of the word between him and the children of Israel indicates that it's not just I gave to the children of Israel, but there is a relationship here between him, between God and the children of Israel. This is a covenant or a contractual relationship. The other reason we know that this is a covenant because of the nature of the text. Beginning in chapter 26, verse 3, we have the typical setup of a covenant. A covenant is like a contract. It includes things you're supposed to do, and if you follow these laws, you will receive rewards, and then things that you are not supposed to do, and if you do that, you do the things you're not supposed to do, then you will receive punishments. Now, we have a similar structure at the end of Deuteronomy, and there the words used are blessings and curses, but it is the very same kind of setup. If you follow the rules, you get blessings. If you don't follow the rules, you will get curses or you will get punishment. And this is really what's going on in chapter 26. Now, the question, of course, becomes, when exactly did this covenant take place? So if we go to the beginning of this portion, the first part in Behar, we have the beginning of chapter 25. It says, the Lord spoke to Moses at Mount Sinai, saying. Okay, and that's very, very interesting, because if you look at the very beginning of the book of Leviticus, you have a different kind of situation. The very, very beginning of Leviticus, it says, and the Lord called to Moses, and the Lord spoke to him from the tent of meeting. Tent of meeting is not Mount Sinai. Okay, the tent of meeting is after Mount Sinai is over. If you go back to the book of Exodus, you will see that God, of course, Moses goes up to Mount Sinai, and he goes up twice, actually, and he receives, not only does he receive the Ten Commandments, but there's a great deal of instruction that God is giving to Moses while he is on Mount Sinai. Then he comes down from Mount Sinai, and they construct the tabernacle. The very end of the book of Exodus, the tabernacle is constructed, and Leviticus begins with now a new place. God now comes to speak to Moses from the tent of meeting. So what is the meaning of this suddenly in chapter 25 that God is speaking to Moses from Mount Sinai? And I think it's fairly obvious that this actually did take place in the middle of the book of Exodus, but for a number of different reasons, it's actually moved to the end of Leviticus. Okay, now I don't want to get involved now in why it's moved to the end of Leviticus, but what I want to do is place it in its context in Exodus. Where does this take place? Now, if you go back to Exodus 24, you will see there that there is a discussion of a covenant. In Exodus 24, it says here, and verse 4, and Moses wrote all the words of the Lord, and he came up early in the morning. He built an altar under the hill, Mount Sinai, 12 monuments or whatever for base. In other words, he basically takes these 12 great stones to build to the altar, 12 representing the 12 tribes of Israel. And then we see in verse 7, and he took the book of the covenant and he called it out to the nation, and the nation responded by saying, everything that God has said we will do and we will listen. Okay, and then there's a ceremony of throwing blood on the altar, and Moses says in verse 8, here is the blood of the covenant which God has entered with you, all these things. Okay, now there's different ways of interpreting what exactly is the covenant. There are some people that say the covenant was the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments are statements, they're not covenants. Other people say, well, it's some of those laws that are written right after in the previous chapters. I believe that this covenant, what this one is talking about, is what we have here in chapters 25 and 26, some of these laws, and particularly the covenant stated in covenant form that we have in 26. This is all stuff that is said to Moses in Mount Sinai, and therefore it belongs there. But I believe in what we really have here is we have the language of the covenant that God enters into with the nation of Israel at Mount Sinai. There will be another covenant 40 years later that will be entered into in the plains of Moab, and that will actually be executed when they come into the land of Israel under Joshua. But that is a separate discussion. So now let's look into the language of the covenant itself that we have here in chapter 26, and what do we see? What's going on here? And we see that in verse 12, we have very much set forward a verse that, in my opinion, says this is the point of the exercise. Okay, God says, "I will walk amongst you. I will be for you as a God, and you will be for me as a people." There it is. God is entering into a covenant, not just to set forth, these are your do's and don'ts, but to create a relationship. And the relationship is a very unique one. It is a relationship where God is our God, and we are his people. And that's a very special relationship because there's a lot of peoples all over the world. And a lot of those peoples at that time believed in all kinds of gods, which of course were false gods. But God here comes forth and says, "You will be my nation, I will be your God." And I don't think that means that he's the God of the nation of Israel and he's not the God of the whole world. Of course he's the God of the whole world. He created the whole world. But he has created a special relationship with the nation of Israel. And through that relationship, and even more so through the obligation that the children of Israel has to obey his commandments, this becomes the vehicle by which God reveals himself to the entire world. Our relationship with God is something that nations are supposed to pay attention to. And when they pay attention to it, it enables them to have a better understanding of who God is, what he expects from us as individuals. And I think that is what we're seeing here in this very first covenant that is set up between the nation of Israel and the God of Israel. Now, towards the end of the covenant, it talks about what happens when they get punished, what happens when they sin, and we see that all kinds of bad things happen. Ultimately, they will be dispersed among the nations. That's the very, very end, and they will there be in their sins and etc. And then we have in verse 41, God says, and we have suddenly a ray of hope. He says, "But I will go with them." God says, "I will not abandon them," even though they're going to go out, be dispersed among the nation. God says, "But I will be with them. I will be there with them. I will bring them from the land of their enemies." Okay, then their hearts will submit. Okay, and then their sins will be expiated. Okay, very nice. It kind of is a way that all this process comes to a very happy end. But what happens next? "I've remembered that my covenant with Jacob, and even my covenant with Isaac, and even my covenant with Abraham, I remember, and the land I will remember." What is God doing here? He's reminding us that this covenant that he is entering into for the first time with the nation of Israel is actually a continuation of earlier covenants. Covenants that God entered into with our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he puts that together with the land. "I remember my covenants with them, and I remember the land." Why? Because the nature of those original covenants begins actually with God's first words to Abraham. "I will give this land to your children." And all the covenants that God enters into with our forefathers contain this idea of not just that your children will become my nation, but that I'm giving this land to them. The land that they are wandering through at that point. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are just kind of wandering through as individuals. They remain strangers in the land. They kind of move around a bit. They don't have a permanent place. But God promises them that land will take on a whole different nature once the nation of Israel, their children become a nation and then come back to the land. Then that land will belong to them as a nation. And here in this this time of entering to the first covenant as a people, God is referring to these two things. Number one, it's a continuation of a previous covenant with these individuals who are the fathers of the nation. But number two, the covenant is inexplicably bound up with the land. And as you look at the nature of the covenant, of course, it is all about the land as well. The blessings connect with the land, the curses connect with the land, or the punishments and the rewards connect with the land. But what God is saying here is essential to the covenant between the nation of Israel and the God of Israel is the land of Israel. It's a 3-point connection, not a 2-point connection. Have a wonderful weekend. Shabbat Shalom.
Okay. I hope you enjoyed that film. And we have lots more film content and emails and articles that I'm sure you will enjoy as well. Check out our website at CFOIC.com and subscribe to our newsletter. You can do that right from the homepage. I know you will really enjoy the content that will land in your inbox on a regular basis. Hope to see you soon.